Today we're going to be discussing all the latest NHL trade rumors. Teams that we're taking a look at include the Boston Bruins, New York Rangers, New Jersey Devils, as well as the Winnipeg Jets. We'll get into all the latest speculation coming up next. So welcome back here to Top Shelf Hockey. As I mentioned, we're going to be discussing some latest NHL trade rumors, and I want to get started here with the Boston Bruins. Now, looking at the latest article from Joe Haggerty here, who covers the Bruins quite closely, discussing the possibility of them trading forward David Backes. Now, as we know, the Boston Bruins are kind of in a tough salary cap situation like many teams, and obviously the cap not rising as much as many thought is certainly causing a lot of issues for teams around the league, and it's certainly also a big reason why there's still so many teams and so much speculation going on about what they're going to do, because they have no choice but to make moves to get all their players signed. Obviously, a lot of these younger players are commanding bigger salaries. The Bruins still have some big-time RFAs like Charlie McAvoy and Brandon Carlo to sign, and it doesn't really leave them a ton of space to do it. So they got to be creative here. And of course, moving a contract like David Backes, who's earning $6 million to be either a fourth-line player or a healthy scratch, is certainly not helping matters here at all. But obviously, according to this article, it kind of makes some good points. Trading David Backes is not going to be easy, and they've already been trying pretty hard throughout the summer to make a move here, and they've yet to be able to find a solution to get him off the books. Now, of course, David Backes only has 2 years left on his contract, and they very well would likely either have to add a sweetener to the deal or take back another unfavorable contract from another team, like we saw with the Lucic and Neal deal. Obviously, both teams kind of had bad contracts. They swapped it, kind of made some adjustments to kind of even things out, and we had ourselves a deal. But of course, the Bruins are looking for a similar type of situation if they can find one. The only problem is a lot of the players around the NHL, they kind of fall into this category of having that bad contract that's tough to move, having longer terms. Now, according to Joe Haggerty here, the Boston Bruins are not interested in trading their 2020 first-round pick, and I don't blame them. It's going to be a very deep, solid draft. Could be one of the best drafts we've had in a long time. So I don't care where you're finishing in the standings. I would be hanging on to that first-round pick if at all possible. Unless it makes absolute sense here to go for a Stanley Cup or a kind of big-time trade, I would not be trading that pick at all, and especially just to move a contract. Now, I know we've seen other teams do that, but for a lot of teams, that's not really worth it. Of course, the other scenarios that they take back a bad contract, and really, like I said, a lot of the guys around the league that fall into this category just have too much term. They don't want to be tied any longer to a bad contract, and Backes only has 2 years left. So the likely solution here is if they can't find a deal, they very well could hang on to him for one more year and then maybe do a buyout next summer. Of course, providing things don't drastically change. I mean, if he finds a way to be more of a healthy contributor to their success here, perhaps they don't do that, but I just can't imagine what he could improve upon that drastically, considering how things have been going for the last year or two, to become a valuable $6 million man on their roster. That is very, very unlikely to happen. But of course, next year, he'd be down to 1 year left on the contract, so doing a buyout would be a lot more cost-effective longer term. If they buy him out now, they're going to be still tied to that contract for 4 more years, whereas if they do it with 1 year remaining on it, they'd only have 2 more years at a reduced hit, so it would certainly be more feasible. So personally, it looks as though David Backes likely does stick around here with the Bruins for another season, and barring some kind of miracle, likely gets bought out next year. But the Bruins do have to likely make some moves here, but it's just not likely going to be him that goes out the door. Now, of course, as we discussed earlier, the New York Rangers signed restricted free agent forward Pavel Buchnevich to a new contract for 2 years at $3.25 million. Combine that with the Jacob Trouba signing at $8 million, which already put them over the cap a little bit. Now they're even further over the cap, and of course, they got to get these guys signed, so they don't really have any choice for the time being. But they also have 2 more guys that are still RFA, and that's forward Brendan Lemieux, as well as defenseman Tony DeAngelo. So that's going to likely push them even further here. Of course, I would guesstimate between those 2 contracts, they're probably going to need somewhere around 3.5, maybe at most $4 million to get both of them done. Probably closer to 3, those my guess, and they're already $4 million over, so they're probably going to land somewhere around $7.5 million over the cap by the time all their contracts here are settled. So of course they have a couple different ways to go about solving this cap problem. Basing on a recent article here in the New York Post by Brett Sergalis, he certainly proposes a couple of different options. One is by trade and one is through buyouts. Now, first of all, let's discuss the trade scenarios that he discusses in this article. The 2 main likely targets here would be forwards Chris Kreider and Vladimir Nemestikov. Both of them are heading into an unrestricted free agency here. They're both in the final year of their contract. So obviously, teams could look at them as a one-year rental if they make the trade now. Both of them have been relatively productive in the past. Of course, Chris Kreider can be that power forward type of guy. Now, on the other hand, Nemestikov, personally, I think when they acquired him from Tampa, I think his best years are already behind him. I think Tampa Bay really played him higher up in the lineup for a short period of time, get him some more points, playing with guys like Stamkos and Kucherov, and then they were able to swing that deal to acquire Ryan McDonagh, and he has not really been able to find any kind of rhythm with the Rangers. So unfortunately for them, his value right now is low and might prove difficult to trade, but certainly those two guys make the most sense. Now, I do think there's a lot of interest in Chris Kreider around the NHL. There was some talk at the NHL draft that he was close to being acquired by the Colorado Avalanche. There's a lot of talk going on with the Rangers and the Avs and other teams as well. So I think Kreider still has enough value that it would certainly be a lot easier to move him. But of course, even trading Kreider alone is not going to get them cap compliant. So they very well might end up going down the trade route and dumping some salary, but they'll also go down the buyout route, which we'll discuss a little bit further as well. Now, obviously, the two main candidates for buyouts are defensemen Kevin Shattenkirk and Brendan Smith. Now, let's take a look here at what each of these would cost and how much it's going to save them in cap space on the short term and what it adds in the long. Now, as you can see on the screen here, Kevin Shattenkirk obviously is making over $6 million. So for the coming year on a buyout, they'd actually end up saving $5.166 million. So that would be pretty significant for the first year. Now into year two though, next year they'd only save about $500,000. His cap hit would still be quite high. So obviously most of what they're saving for the coming year would end up going back on the year after, which could potentially pose issues. And of course it also adds 2 extra years on because it's over twice the amount of remaining time, which adds 2 more years at $1.43 million. So certainly a fairly expensive buyout, not really ideal, but it does give them the flexibility for the coming season that they could potentially make other moves during next year or beyond to kind of, deal with the remaining effects from that buyout. Looking at Brendan Smith, of course, he doesn't make quite as much as Shattenkirk. For the coming year, a buyout would save $3.37 million. For the year after, they'd only end up saving 1.2. So a big chunk of what they would save would end up going back on their cap next year. And of course, in his situation, he also has 2 years left, so the remaining payout would be over 4 years. So it would add 2 more years, $1.145 million. So if they buy out one or both of these players, they're going to end up being tied to these contracts for 4 years instead of 2, but it does provide short-term relief, mostly for the coming season. For the 3 years after next season, they're certainly still tied to that. It's really just that year 2 that the cap hit is really not favorable. So it certainly would provide short-term relief, give them more flexibility, but then they'd have to figure things out how to kind of work around that for the second year. Years 3 and 4 really wouldn't be so bad overall. And no matter what here, they're still saving money in both years, just not nearly as much in year 2. They do go the route of buying out Shattenkirk and Smith or moving both those guys out of the roster. It would still potentially have a pretty decent blue line. The right side could feature guys like Jacob Trouba, Tony DeAngelo, and Adam Fox, while the left side could still have guys like Brady Shea, Mark Stahl, and it may be a youngster like Lieber Hayek or something. Either way, the 5 out of 6 guys would be pretty solid defensemen. I know Adam Fox would be a rookie, but he looks really good coming out of college hockey. Certainly a top prospect. So either way, the Rangers could probably get by without Shattenkirk and Smith. Either they're traded or bought out. So I think it's certainly something they at least need to consider. Now, the article kind of speculates that the buyouts are likely going to be more likely than trades, but it's really hard to say. Maybe they could do one of each. I mean, let me know what you think down in the comments. How do the Rangers go about this? Because they're going to have to save at least $7, maybe close to $8 million just to become compliant, and that gives them no wiggle room, no flexibility. They don't really have any contracts right now that could fall under that long-term injury reserve to get some relief under that way, like we've seen like the Maple Leafs do by acquiring Clarkson and a Nathan Horton contract. So obviously they don't have that option. They don't have players that fall into that category, so they have to go about things a little bit differently here. Of course, the other possibility is trading a guy like a Shattenkirk or Smith and taking on a contract that could go on LTIR. That's a possibility as well. Seems to be a new trend we're seeing with a guy like Kyle Dubas kind of setting the stage there with the Maple Leafs the other day. And of course, yesterday we talked about a potential trade involving the Canucks, maybe moving Louis Eriksson, taking on Ryan Kessler, putting that contract on LTIR to create more cap space to satisfy their situation. So all these teams that are strapped for cash, they don't always need to shed. They can kind of do subtraction by addition by taking on an LTIR contract and giving up a player who could actually play instead. In the proposed three-way deal that we discussed in a prior video, and if you missed it, I'll put a link to it up here in the YouTube cards. Obviously, that deal involved the Canucks, the Ducks, and the Senators. The Canucks would lose Louis Eriksson and take on Ryan Kesler. Of course, the Ducks get Eriksson instead, since he is actually able to play better than, which is a step ahead of Kesler. And then in the same time, the Senators would lose a contract going to the Canucks in the form of Mike Condon and taking on a little bit of Eriksson's salary. I know it was a really complicated scenario, but at the end of the day here, the Canucks would be taking on contracts for players who can't play and basically buying some cap space through the long-term injury reserve system. New York Rangers and other teams that are kind of strapped for cash and going way over the cap here could also take on the same method rather than go out these other methods here that we already discussed. Of course, there's only so many players around the league who kind of fall into that category, so they are a little bit limited, and obviously the teams that hold those contracts would have to kind of want something that they would have on their roster. So maybe they take on a Kevin Shattenkirk, for example, in exchange for the LTIR contract instead. So either way, there's some options out there, but the Rangers have to make moves of some kind, and I'd love to know what you think that's the best way for them to go about doing it. Now, as we know, the Winnipeg Jets have certainly lost a fair bit of players through free agency, and their blue line has taken a major hit, losing guys like Tyler Myers, trading Jacob Trouba, and of course Ben Sherratt as well. I came across an article from the Winnipeg Suns writer Scott Billett kind of discussing a possibility and how they very well might be able to go about from a fairly cheap method to kind of bolster that blue line a little bit, to take on a young defender who very well might be able to help them out. And that's the Dallas Stars prospect defenseman Julius Honka, who's kind of far along enough now to not really be considered a prospect, but certainly we discussed before could use a new fresh start, some new scenery here, because things just not have worked out for him in Dallas. Now, he's a former first-round selection. Of course, he's from Finland. The Winnipeg Jets have lots of players in their organization from Finland. So there'll be lots of Finnish players around him, so he should be able to fit in that way to kind of make him feel comfortable and get used to the systems over there. Of course, they have enough room on their blue line right now with all the guys they've lost that he could easily step into a bigger role and get a little bit more consistent playing time. The article here also references the fact that based on previous play in the last year or so, he's been at least as good as Dmitry Kulikov, and Kulikov likely won't be bought up by the Jets. He's probably going to have to play. They likely don't have the room on their roster to go ahead and buy him out, even though they really could use the roster space. They lost too much depth of that blue line, and they can't afford to lose another player with experience here. So should the Winnipeg Jets consider going after Julius Honka, be a cheap addition, probably end up paying him just what his qualifying offer would be, which is around $874,000. He obviously hasn't hit his full potential yet, and if he can develop into what he was expected to be, the Winnipeg Jets very well might get themselves a steal of a deal. Now, moving on to the New Jersey Devils, we've seen some recent comments from managing partner Josh Harris indicating that Ray Shero is still wheeling and dealing and is certainly not done. Obviously, we've seen the New Jersey Devils already have a pretty big offseason. Of course, they had the fortunate luck to draft number 1 overall and get Jack Hughes. They then had to draft acquired PK Subban. Of course, they signed Wayne Simmons as a free agent. This team is certainly shaping up to be a fair bit better than next year. At least on paper, things are looking pretty decent. So according to Josh Harris, like I said, the managing partner, they are not done, and they're looking to add more to this roster. Now, of course, they have a player in Taylor Hall who's a pending unrestricted free agent who seemed a little bit reluctant to sign a long-term contract, and both sides seemed to agree that it was probably best that they kind of wait things out, see how the summer goes, maybe go into the season, and make sure for both sides that it's still a great fit long-term before coming to a mega contract extension. And really, to be fair, it probably does make sense. I know there was a lot of talk that maybe Hall doesn't want to stay in New Jersey, but really at the end of the day, Taylor Hall's just tired of losing. He's tired of not making the playoffs, and even though he kind of believes in their vision, he kind of wants to see them see it through and see what they can put together here so that he can play some meaningful playoff hockey and actually have a shot at winning a Stanley Cup before he gets further along in his career, and before you know it, it's over, and sometimes you just never get a chance. Some of these players' careers seem to go by with the blink of an eye, and if you don't get that right opportunity and you're all wasted away on teams that are always missing the playoffs, you'll never get a chance to really win and fulfill your dream. So obviously it's a big decision to sign long term, and I think it's probably a wise idea for both sides. They kind of take that wait and see approach. But I would think at this point, Taylor Hall's pretty happy with how this offseason's gone, and nice to see some new direction here for the Devils going forward. Now, as far as what those moves might be, there's a variety of things they could be looking at, and some more speculation here from Chris Ryan of NJ.com. He's talking about the fact that his likely left shot defense is likely the main area they're looking to bolster here. The right side certainly looks a lot better by adding PK Subban. And maybe, just maybe, they'd be talking to left shot defenseman, free agent defenseman here, Jake Gardiner, who's still looking for work and likely would fit within what they're looking to do. He's a great puck-moving defenseman, great skater, and certainly that's the type of player they're looking for that side of their blue line. They still have plenty of cap space with almost $17 million. They do have some contracts left in Will Butcher and Pavel Zacha, but they're not going to be big-time deals. They would certainly have more than enough cap space to add a guy like Gardner should they decide to go down that road. Now, they've also been linked to forward Jason Zucker. There had been some speculation in the last few weeks as well that they were having some trade talks with Minnesota about the possibility of acquiring him. I don't know how far along those talks actually got or how serious things were, but they were one of the teams that were interested and apparently had been having some talks with the Minnesota Wild. The Minnesota Wild have tried to trade him on multiple occasions, and both of them have kind of failed here, so I would not be surprised to see them go ahead and try to execute that a third time, and maybe, as I say, the third time will be the charm, and they'll finally get a deal done, which I think Zucker would certainly fit nicely with New Jersey, and I think Gardner would as well. They may or may not be able to do both of those guys, depending on how close to the cap they want to spend here, but either way, New Jersey apparently is not done dealing, and we should be expecting more moves, according to Josh Harris, their managing partner. So stay tuned here. Let me know what you think the Devils are up to and what makes the most sense that they need to add before this offseason is over. That's your latest roundup of all the latest NHL trade rumors. Let me know your thoughts and opinions down in the comment section, and we'll continue the conversation. If you're new to the channel, consider subscribing and turning on your notifications so you don't miss any future content, and give this video a thumbs up if you enjoyed it as well. I'd appreciate it if you did. As always, thank you for watching, and I will catch you next time.